Welcome everybody to the IDRPP's Time to Act Mental Health Echo. Sorry we're a little bit late in letting people in and getting started. My name is Tori Coons and I am project support for Project Echo, and I have the privilege to introduce our housekeeping slides before we hear from our presenter. Let me see if it'll actually go. There we go. So we record our echo sessions for educational and quality improvement purposes. By participating in this session, you consent to being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, feel free to disconnect from the session. Echo is an interactive community. To help support that, we ask our participants to be engaged in asking questions after our didactic speaker and to provide feedback or ideas during our case presentation or discussion. As our discussions often surround our experiences with kids and family, please protect these individuals' privacy. We ask that you avoid using identifying information such as their name, as well as the names of family members, friends, or coworkers. If you have any questions as to what would be considered identifying information, please reach out to a hub member. All of our hub members have an asterisk before their name or will shortly. So during our echo sessions, we have a subject matter expert or didactic speaker, a case presentation or discussion, and then professional networking. For this session, we ask that you rename your profile to your first and last name, state, job title, and organization. And to do that, you can click the participants icon at the bottom menu of the Zoom window, your profile, and then rename your profile in the dialog box. We also ask that you put this same information in the chat so that we can facilitate that networking later on, and so people can contact or reach out at any point. So today, if questions come up during the didactic presentation, we are probably going to just wait till the end to ask them. So if you'd like to put them in the chat, we can start collecting them and save them for then. Or you can just wait to ask your questions till the question period. So we will not, I guess we will use the raise hand feature at that point. So to do so, you can hover your mouse on the Zoom window to locate the menu, select participants, and then click the raise hand option. In our echo sessions, we are asking our participants to respect the presenter by asking questions in the chat or using the raise hand feature. We also ask that we keep our questions brief and on topic. If you would, we'd like it for you to introduce yourself and your organization before asking a question. And then if, again, you're willing to turn on your camera during sessions, as it helps with connection, building community, and making networking more meaningful. By attending this session, you can earn professional development credits. To do so, please fill out the survey Janelle will be dropping in the chat throughout this session. All of our information is stored on Canvas, so if you want to prepare for sessions, review them, or implement strategies discussed in the echo sessions, that's where you can find all that information. If you would like access to Canvas, email timetoact@aggies.usu.edu, and we will send you instructions for how to register. Case studies are where we share information about real-life situations, hear from colleagues about recommendations, and receive valuable feedback to take and apply. If you're interested in presenting a case, which we highly suggest that you do, please reach out to timetoact@aggies.usu.edu. To stay connected with everything Project Echo, we would love it if you would follow our Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Leo does an excellent job with reminders and also just highlighting all of the amazing things that happen in this project. So without any further ado, I would like to turn the time over to Matt, who is our presenter today. He will be talking about masculinity and mental health, and we are very excited to hear from him.
Boy, well, I'm glad someone's excited.
Very excited, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, let me share my screen here and we will jump in. So thank you, Tori, and thanks to the Mental Health Echo group for inviting me to come back and talk about this topic. This is a topic that has become increasingly relevant in my life. And so as I go through this, I will be sharing some personal stories at the very beginning here, as I have on this slide. I should probably put out there a trigger warning or a content warning. I am going to be talking about issues of suicide, issues of mental health, and issues of violence, interpersonal violence. And so I know that certain people have certain triggers and trauma and everything else, but I am going to talk about those because all three of those and many types of violence are very relevant, unfortunately, to male mental health. And it's really hard to avoid an open conversation on the topic without actually addressing um, those issues. So I'm going to begin with a quick introduction to who I am. And part of that is just so you know where I'm coming from. And part of it is to give you some context for how I grew up, because a lot of this is informed by my own experience with my mental health. So I am originally from Fairbanks, Alaska. I grew up in the middle of Alaska for my whole life. I left when I was 18 and went to college at the University of Utah, primarily so I could ski and play hockey. And I skied with the University of Utah ski team. I played hockey with the University of Utah back in the early 90s. Got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD there, and moved into the USED network, which the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice is Utah's USED. And I spent my whole career within the USED network doing work on disability issues. So I'm currently the executive director of the USU Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice here. I also have a clinical associate professorship in the Special Education and Rehabilitation Counseling Department, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Developmental Disabilities Network Journal. The pictures here, though, I think are important. They're not just there because I want to show off Alaska. But I grew up as a very typical male. I grew up in a very traditional conservative society. I grew up hunting and fishing and riding horses and really doing a lot of the things that, right, especially out here in the West, that we associate with traditional masculinity. And so I very much associate my upbringing and some of the issues that I faced throughout my life with my experience within that socialization process as a Western independent male, as it were. It's really only been within the last few years that I've started to focus on mental health. And I'll tell you a little bit about that story here in a bit, but it really wasn't until 2010 that I started to recognize that mental health had a significant overlap with developmental disabilities. And as I started to address my mental health and understand it better, I recognized that we need to do better within the field of developmental disabilities and addressing mental health. So in the interim, I've been one of the principal investigators on the Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities National Training Center. I am a board member on the Mental Health and Intellectual Developmental Disabilities National Research Consortium at Johns Hopkins Medical School, and then a former member of the White House Task Force on Mental Health, Homelessness, and Substance Abuse. So a lot of my career, especially, like I said, over the past 15 years or so, has been focused in the mental health arena. And a big part of that is because of my personal experiences with my own mental health. So with that said, again, and on the side, I'm a river guide. So talking about male stereotypes, I like to be outside. I like to be in the wild. I like to camp. I like to hunt. I like to fish. I like to do all of these things that are stereotypically male. Um, and yet I struggle with my mental health. And it's taken me a long time to actually reach a point where I can talk about that and where I can point out what I think some of the issues we're facing within our society around that. I really didn't even pay attention to my mental health until 2009. And in 2009, specifically on June 24th, 2009, my life changed. I was coaching hockey. My daughter played hockey. This is her and I that year. I was the chair of the Moscow Charter School Board. I was living in Moscow, Idaho at this period of time, working at the University of Idaho. Um, and I woke up that morning of June 24th and went out to my breakfast table and was sitting there eating breakfast. And our house was just down the road from the fire station. And I remember the fire trucks, like this was about 9:30 in the morning, just blaring down the street and screaming by. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, somebody's having a really bad morning. Um, After I ate breakfast, I went and looked out and I could see that there was a fire about a mile away. And on my way to go to the charter school, I was in the process of shutting down the charter school, submitting the state reports. As the chair of the charter school board, I had to do a lot of administrative tasks. And my plan was to go to the charter school that morning. I drove by this house that had burned down. I saw them removing a body. And again, just didn't think much of it and went to the charter school. When I got to the charter school, I was met by the sheriff, by police, by ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and come to learn that the third grade teacher at Moscow Charter School had been murdered by her husband. And that was the body that I saw being removed from that house. Um, to make things worse, I was friends with the husband who committed the murder. I worked with his mom. His mom worked with me at the university center there at the University of Idaho. She was our accountant. I was friends with the family. We actually raised cows and pigs together, and every spring we would butcher animals and fill our freezers with the meat that we had raised. And we were very close with them. And this whole experience, again, being at the charter school and having the third grade teacher killed, but then also having that personal connection with the family of the murderer and the murderer himself, threw my life into a tailspin. I ended up having to manage the media response, and because of how salacious the details of this murder ended up being and how small the community was, it really attracted a lot of media attention. And every day I would drive to the charter school and we would have news teams from Seattle and Spokane and Boise and Salt Lake and other places out there wanting to really tell this story, of how this husband had killed his wife. She was, and it wasn't just killing his wife. She was actually 7 months pregnant at the time that he killed her and then tried to burn down the house. So anyway, I could go into the details there, but let's just suffice it to say I went into a tailspin, um, trying to manage my emotions, trying to manage just the responsibilities I had as a charter school administrator, trying to manage the relationship with the family. And I started to develop some unhealthy coping mechanisms. I found I started drinking a lot, and I found that I started finding other ways to sort of numb the emotions that were really overwhelming to me. And in the spring of 2010, after about 8 months of this, I was in a really dark place. I was not able to, I was having a hard time even getting up and working. And I did what any good academic does. Um, I took some time off. I took a sabbatical from the University of Idaho and I left and I went and was accepted into the mind body medicine program at Harvard Medical School. And I'd primarily gone to Harvard Medical School for myself. I wanted to learn more about mental health. I wanted to learn more about how emotions impact our body. I wanted to understand what was happening to me. And I felt that removing myself from the community and from my responsibilities would make that much more possible. Um, I remember going out there in the first few days, how difficult a struggle it was not to run out to the liquor store to get a drink. I told myself when I went to Boston, I'm not going to drink anymore. And I remember what a challenge that was for me to have the self-control not to do that because it had become a habit. It had become a regular coping mechanism. So as I'm out there in Boston, that summer of 2010, I started to discover some other things. I started to dig into my family history. And as I talked to my parents and as I talked to other members of my extended family, I discovered that it was not atypical for me to be experiencing these mental health issues. Now, this is my grandfather on my mother's side. My grandfather on my mother's side was a cowboy. He grew up in southeast Idaho, outside of Idaho Falls. He ran a cattle ranch and a sheep ranch. Um, but we always used to like to go visit Grandpa because he never went to work. And as a child, I never thought about this. Grandpa was always at home, and yes, he would go out and feed the cows and the sheep, and he would go out and ride horses and everything else. But from what we could tell, Grandpa never really had a job. Um, Now, my grandma did. My grandma was a teller at the bank. So, going all the way back, it was really uncommon in those days, right, for women, especially in Southeast Idaho, to work. And yet, my grandma was the primary wage earner in the house. She was a teller in the bank from the 1940s all the way through the 1980s there in Idaho Falls. And grandma seemed to be what held the family together. And my grandpa, although he could be fun, had a very dark streak and he liked to be alone. And again, as a young child, I never understood what that was. But as I talked to my parents and as I, read things that were written by my grandfather and everything else, it became very clear that my grandfather also struggled with depression and anxiety and other mental health issues. It's why he could never hold down an actual job because there would be weeks at a time where he would find it hard to just get out of bed and to go do things. Um, and so discovering that was to a certain extent comforting. It helped me understand that this was not something that I alone was experiencing. This is something that ran in my family and that there was a genetic component to it. And that a lot of those behaviors and emotions and coping mechanisms and everything else were also things that my grandfather struggled with. And so that was helpful to a certain extent, and yet it was still a challenge for me to really figure out, right, what I needed to do to support my mental health. So I could go into a lot more of my personal story, but I think what we need to do is probably shift to more of a societal view and why we need to talk about this, because my story is just one story of many men in this country who are really struggling with their mental health. So if we look at data, especially since the COVID pandemic, men around the world and across the US in all demographic segments are experiencing an epidemic of loneliness and emotional isolation that's really exacting a terrible toll. Men feel more alone than they ever have in the past. And as we know, mammals in the wild that are alone and isolated don't last long. There's a reason why mammals gather in herds, why birds gather in flocks, why fish school, because that social buffering, having other people around you, other organisms around you, helps us feel safe and supported. And we've learned through a lot of the research over the past 25 years that social isolation causes stress, and long-term chronic stress has lots of negative consequences. One of the most interesting studies that was done in the National Health Service in Great Britain, and it was published back in 2021, where they found that social isolation and loneliness was as bad for a person as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. Now, most of us can't even imagine smoking one cigarette per day because it's kind of disappeared from a large part of our culture. Um, and so 15 cigarettes per day is just incredible. And honestly, when you look at the lifelong implications of loneliness and isolation, it can result in a lifespan that's 15 to 20 years shorter as a result of the stress that happens. Now, that's if somebody can manage the stress. What we also know is that according to the Centers for Disease Control, suicide is on the rise here in the United States. Approximately 121 Americans die by suicide each day, and 93 of those people who die are men. It's approximately 75% of the daily count of people who commit suicide. And the group that's growing the fastest are men in the age bracket of 45 to 64. When we look at that suicide rate across all population groups, it's about triple the rate for women among white, Black, Hispanic, and American Indian, Alaska Native groups. It's about double in Asian American groups. But it is a significant issue that we are facing here in the United States. When we break down this data a little bit more and we look specifically at the West and the rural West, the highest rates of suicide in the United States are in the mountain time zone. And that's also, we're going to include Alaska, even though they're in their own time zone. But rates of suicide by males in Montana, Alaska, and Wyoming are roughly double the national rate. And then the rate in New Mexico, Idaho, and Utah are just slightly less than that. We're at about 1.7, 1.8 the national rate. So not quite double, but very close. And it's ironic when we look at this that a lot of these states, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, right, there's a strong Western identity, right? There's this independent, sort of Western rural, right, image that goes along the cowboy image to a certain extent. Um, and yet these are the states where men are most clearly struggling the most with their mental and emotional health. Now, a lot of people want to know why the suicide rate is so high out in the West and among men. And honestly, the big reason is that there is more access to guns. Men tend to have more access to guns than women, and those who commit suicide using firearms tend to be more successful than those without. And when we look at rates of gun ownership here in the West are much higher than other portions of the country. And so there is a correlation with that Western identity and with gun ownership with some of these suicide rates. But even when we break it down a little bit further, it's not right just there are very masculine sort of groups, right? Sort of stereotypical groups that struggle. Veterans, we know that the suicide rate among veterans is very high. Farmers and ranchers are very high. Workers in industry like mining and construction, highly physical, highly, right, male-dominated fields also are struggling with high rates of suicide and mental health. And when we think about it, what do all these groups have in common? Well, they're working in stereotypical, independent fields with very strong beliefs about what a man should or shouldn't be and how a man should or shouldn't behave and what a man should or shouldn't talk about. But if we expand that out even, it's not just in the United States. In fact, if we look at North America and South America combined, 1 in 5 men in the Americas will not reach the age of 50 due to issues related to toxic masculinity. And when I say toxic masculinity, I'm meaning some of those stereotypical beliefs about what a man is supposed to be. A man is supposed to be tough, and a man is supposed to be unemotional, and a man is supposed to suck it up, and a man is supposed to be aggressive and violent, right? A man is supposed to own a gun, right? A lot of these things reinforce and actually cause some of the mental health issues that men are struggling with. In fact, according to the World Health Organization, the gender roles, norms, and practices that are socially imposed on men, especially in the West, reinforce a lack of self-care and a neglect of their own physical and mental health. You're just supposed to be tough. You're just supposed to suck it up and deal with it. And so this entire issue can be summed up in a particular term. In the Americas, it's really a historically constructed hegemonic form of socializing men known as machismo. And machismo is talked a lot more about in the research in South America, and yet the same patterns and the same notion, the same concept is very much relevant here within the United States. And it's something that's been growing within the Americas since the early 1900s. And so this isn't just an issue that, right, we're facing out here in Utah or in the rural West. This is an issue that men across North America, South America are all struggling with as a result of the expectations placed upon them by society. So, what are the public health implications of machismo? Well, machismo, because it reinforces that lack of self-care, that lack of acknowledgement of emotion, that lack of understanding of a person's mental health, what it does is it leads to certain behaviors, right, as a way of managing some of the emotional baggage that men are carrying. And when we look at it, there's really three overarching risks, according to the research. Number one, machismo, or we could use the term toxic masculinity for lack of a better term, maybe one that people are more familiar with here, leads to a risk to women and children in the form of violence, sexually transmitted infections, and a lack of shared responsibility in the home. So it directly ripples out and impacts the family. It also results in a risk to other men through accidents, homicide, and other violence because men oftentimes don't have the tools to manage their emotional or mental health, which leads to aggression. And aggression, again, leads to violence or a lack of self-regulation, which, as it says here, right, leads to accidents or death through homicide. And then there's risk to self, such as suicide, accidents, alcoholism, and other addictions as a way of managing a person's emotional health without the proper tools. And that was really where I found myself, right? I hadn't been given the proper tools when I was going through my personal health in 2009 to understand my emotions and to understand how to manage my mental health. And I had turned to alcoholism, I had turned to substance use as a way of managing those emotions. I also happened to be much more aggressive at home. We got in more arguments with my wife. I punched holes in the wall. I did things I was not proud of, but primarily because I had been raised in a culture of machismo and toxic masculinity. And I was told, right, you just need to suck it up. You just need to work through it. And if you can't work through it, it's okay to lash out. It's okay to be aggressive. It's okay to, right, blow your top because that's what a man does, right? And yet that's not really a healthy notion of masculinity. Historically, that's not a notion of healthy masculinity. If we go all the way back to the Greeks in the Middle Ages with the notion of chivalry and virtue ethics from Aristotle, a man was somebody who was able to, right, balance his emotions and who was not aggressive and somebody who protected the weak. And yet we've moved very much away from that within the past century to a version of masculinity that is much less healthy, much less balanced, and that results in some significant public health implications. So a lot of times, so when we look at this research on masculinity and mental health, and there's actually been quite a few studies done on this. A lot has come out since COVID, but another 2017 study on the economic impact of harmful masculine stereotypes showed that a belief in traditional male stereotypes, this machismo, this toxic masculinity, is linked with increased violence and higher risk of suicide. Again, just what the World Health Organization pointed out on the prior slide. And researchers have started to refer to men in this situation of being trapped in this limited range of behaviors as being trapped in the man box. And so the man box is the limited range of acceptable emotions, experience, language that men are allowed to display in public if they want to retain their status as a man. And anybody who is on this call who is a man has felt this man box in some way, shape, or form. There are just certain right settings where you're not going to cry and you're not going to express emotions because you don't want people to judge you and see you as less tough, less of a man, right? And so being trapped within this man box, just like anybody that's trapped, it leads to frustration and it leads to, again, violence towards oneself and then violence projected outwards as well. We can actually measure the man box and we can actually find certain beliefs that are directly correlated with this man box. In fact, to help clinicians more effectively monitor male patients' attitudes and their mental health, researchers have developed a short version of the World Health Organization survey that has 5 items that have the strongest correlation with violence and poor mental health. And if we look at these, again, you're really just seeing a picture of toxic masculinity. So if you and these 5 questions, with these 5 questions, a clinician can get a relatively good idea of whether a male is going to, again, have poor mental health and be prone to violence. But again, these questions are: number one, a man shouldn't have to do household chores. 2, men should use violence to get respect if necessary. 3, a real man can and should have as many sexual partners as he can. 4, a man who talks a lot about his worries, fears, and problems shouldn't really get respect. And then 5, a gay guy is not a real man. So when we look at these 5 questions here and we correlate this with behavioral outcomes, mental health outcomes, what we find is there is a direct correlation between traditional beliefs about masculinity and poor mental health. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this? Well, that slide went past. Let me go. I'm actually not going to get to how we deal with it yet, because I do think it's worth digging into this. A lot of this comes from negative socialization. I don't think that any of us, if you're a man, can think of somebody sitting you down and telling you, as a man, this is how you need to behave. We've just sort of absorbed it through culture. We've absorbed it through family systems. We've absorbed it through school. We've absorbed it through media. And yet, absorbing it through culture, what we've learned is that, right, men who discuss their emotions, men who cry or admit they're struggling with depression or other mental health issues, we have very specific terms that are applied to these men. They're considered to be weak, soft. And again, I apologize for some of the language, but some of the language I think is really important, right? A pussy, gay, not a real man. Um, and yet, right, it's a feminization of men, and men become highly sensitive to these things. And in order to avoid being called these things, will bottle up emotions and will not express them, even if it is the healthy things to do. Um, and it's not just within traditional cultural groups that have traditional patriarchal power systems. We find that these messages about masculinity are also translated through single parent households. They're translated within same-sex households. They're translated through gangs, through homeless youth, through schools. Um, and schools really are the big place where males become socialized into this current form of toxic masculinity. And schools have really moved away. As we look at schools in the United States, especially over the past 30 years, schools' role in helping to build character and to help people, right, gain the personal skills they need to live in a productive society has significantly changed. Nowadays, we're worried about, right, whether you can pass a test on math or things like that. And we've gotten rid of a lot of the socio-emotional learning that some of us, when we went through school, got. Nowadays, going to school, you won't get any of that in many cases. And so a lot of these values and beliefs are being transmitted through peers, through coaches, through other social groups that are directly correlated with the school setting. Um, and so what this means is that men who are raised and who are socialized into this man box and believe these stereotypes, they become limited in their ability to understand and interact with the full range of human emotions. After a while, it becomes natural just to suppress emotion, to not talk about your feelings, because that's not what a real man does. And so men become controlled by culture. They're literally victims of culture because they haven't been given the language, the tools, or the space that they need in order to exert control over their emotional experience. And by bottling up that emotional experience, we know that anger turned inwards, right, becomes depression. Anger turned outwards becomes violence and aggression. It's important, again, that we recognize that we need to create spaces where men can gain the language and have safety in order to express their emotional life, if we're going to actually address this problem in any way, shape, or form. So what does this look like? Well, again, this has been a topic that I've become very, very mindful of. And yet it happens here, just right in the Cache Valley here in Utah, where we live. When I first moved here to the Cache Valley in 2017, I started playing on an adult hockey league. Um, and the adult hockey league is exactly what you expect it is. It's a very traditional male sort of environment. It's a bunch of bros who get together late at night and go out on the ice and hit and beat each other up. And there was a guy who used to play goalie for our team named Billy. And Billy hung out at the rink all the time. Billy didn't just play goalie for our team. Billy wanted to play goalie for every team. And as I hung out at the rink and got to know Billy, I learned that Billy was a recovering addict. And the reason that Billy was at the rink was because he didn't have any other place to be. And being at the rink and playing hockey and being on the ice helped him deal with the cravings and with, right, his addictive personality. And it kind of helped him stay sober. So in 2019, um, that spring, the ice rink was closed for a few months and we weren't able to play hockey. And so Billy didn't have that social environment. Billy didn't have the locker room where he could talk to other men. Billy wasn't busy on the ice. He had to find other ways to keep himself busy in January, February, March here in the valley. And in March, I was driving down to Provo, Utah. I was helping to coach my daughter's hockey team at the time. And I remember driving down to Provo for a hockey game with my daughter, and I got a phone call. I got a phone call from the captain of our adult league hockey team. And he told me that Billy had taken his life because Billy had felt so isolated. He didn't have that connection. He didn't know who to reach out to, that he had reached a point where instead of going back to drugs and everything else, he decided it was better to not live. And I remember that really tore me up. And I remember breaking down and crying in the car as I drove down. And my kids even say to this day, it's one of the few times they've seen me cry. And yet my son has said that was so important for him to see that emotional release and to see that it is okay to express that emotion and to feel sad and to feel grief, right? And that pain and not just bottle it up and pretend like nothing happened. And so it happens every day. It happened to my son in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. My son was in school. This was before school had sort of been shut down. He had a lab partner, and this lab partner grew up in a very traditional household. His lab partner was struggling in school. He was struggling with just, yeah, figuring out who he was. He was 14 years old. And at the beginning of the pandemic, once school was sort of let out and students ended up back at home, my son's lab partner, Robert, uh, again, didn't have that socialization. He didn't have other males to talk to. He was alone. He got in a fight with his father. Um, and his father got on him about his grades and everything else. And because Robert didn't have anywhere else to turn, Robert ran out to his father's car. His father kept a pistol in the glove compartment of his car, and he came in, he locked himself in the bathroom, and he shot himself. Thankfully, Robert survived, and he is back and within the community. Unfortunately, he has significant disabilities as a result of his choice to yeah to try to kill himself because of, again, the lack of isolation, the lack of social support, and the isolation and the loneliness that he felt. And so that's what it looks like. It's simple things. It's not complicated. A lot of it is due to isolation, and a lot of it is due to the lack of skills that men have to address some of these issues in their emotional life. So, my experience has taught me several important lessons. Then I don't want to assume that, a lot of you probably know these things already, and yet I think it's good to reinforce them. So, number one, my experience taught me that I was not taught about mental health. And so I didn't have the language to understand what I was going through and what my emotions meant and how my emotions correlated with depression and anxiety and everything else. Number two, I was held to an unrealistic expectation of who I should be and how I should behave as a man. I was not trained in a healthy model of masculinity. And as a result, I was stuck in that man box. I had a limited set of skills to deal with my emotional life. Number three, and we have seen this over and over and over again, our increasingly online life has resulted in more isolation and loneliness than we understand. Yes, you can go online and have an AI bot serve as your therapist. And yes, you can go online and type out your emotional experience and send it out into the ether. And yet, there is not that human connection, that feeling of safety, that feeling of support, like there's someone there that you can rely on that we get when we have in-person interactions with another human being. And then four, mental health, unlike physical health, affects everyone within your sphere of influence. Although mental health conditions are not technically contagious, they do cause a ripple effect that run through the social sphere. It's not an individual phenomenon. If my depression results in me being angry and aggressive, that doesn't just hurt me, that hurts my family and my friends and my coworkers and everyone else around me. And so it's important to understand that mental health is not an individual issue. It is a societal issue, and that poor mental health is something that affects everybody within the sphere of someone's influence. So, what is the root of the problem, and what do we do about it? Well, um, I'm going to quickly go through this because we could have a long conversation about this. But number one, I think we really need to think about defining a new masculinity. We need to engage in conversations with boys about what it really means to be a man. We need to talk about things like gender norms. We need to talk about violence. We need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about emotions and social pressures and expectations. And we need to really be a lot more transparent and break down the walls of that man box so that people have the language that they need to talk about what's happening in their internal life. And doing this early on is really important. Catching boys before they're fully socialized is key. And so this needs to start in the homes and in schools, not in high school. This needs to start very, very early on. Many of the messages that I got about what it meant to be a boy or a man, I got in first and second grade when I was getting in fights with my friend on the playground. And right? People were challenging me to, right, do stupid things. Um, a lot of this starts very, very early on. And so it's really, really important that we be thinking about how are we socializing males when they are 4, 5, 6 years old, because that is when some of these key beliefs and behaviors are instilled first. Three, fathers and adult males need to model healthy behaviors and coping mechanisms. Males learn a little bit differently than females. Males learn through observation and apprenticeship. Males learn by seeing other males do something and then by copying it. And when males do not have healthy role models and people who they can see navigating their emotional life, it's difficult for them to understand how they might do it themselves. And so it's really, really important that as a male, we recognize that it's important that we model healthy, mentally healthy, physically healthy, emotionally healthy behaviors because others, males, are watching us and will learn that way. And then four, adult males need to stand up and point out aspects of toxic masculinity and machismo that are harmful and antiquated. It's important that we talk about it and that we address it and that we recognize, right, some of the problems with these beliefs because they are really what is causing the mental health crisis for men these days. As I say here, if we can't talk about it, then we can't exercise control over it. And that's something I want to talk about here. It's important that we talk about it. If there's one thing we can do that's going to make a difference, it's talking about it, whether you're an individual male or whether it is us as a society. Um, there is something called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis comes from linguistics. And what it says is it goes all the way back to the Bible. And in the Bible, in the Gospel of John, at the very beginning, there's the first verse says, "In the beginning there was the Word." And the Word, right? And through the Word, the world was created. And a lot of times that's a throwaway verse. People don't even pay attention to it. And yet it's really, really important because it's not, John doesn't say in the beginning there was God and God created, in the beginning there was the Word, there was language. And through language, God created the earth. And so the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis builds on that. And it says, we create and understand our world through language. You understand your emotions through language. And as you talk about your emotions and understand, right, how to put those emotions into word, you're able to exercise control over those emotions. When we talk about something, we can set it aside. It becomes external to us. It's not just an experience when we talk about it. It can become abstract. It can become something that we hold apart from ourselves and we look at and we explore. And so if we can talk about something, we can work with it. But if we don't talk about it, then we can't actually work with it. If we don't have the language to talk about something, we can't actually set it aside and really understand what's going on there. But this is the primary reason why talk therapy works. This is why cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. And right when you go to visit with a therapist, what do? They're not giving you pills or anything. They're having you talk through things because talking through things helps us exercise control and recognize that our emotions are not us, that we are separate from our emotions, and that we can actually control our response to the emotions within our body. So it's really, really important that we talk about this. And I think this echoes a great first step at doing that. Um, so as men, because I know there are some men on this call, what can we do? Well, and you're going to see some overlap here with some of the stuff I've talked about before. But just like I mentioned in that prior slide, men have to own their mental health and they have to be willing to talk about it. Number one, we need practice. And number two, other men need to see us talking about it. We need to learn to talk about our mental health the same way we talk about our high blood pressure or heart attacks or athletic injuries, right? For men, sometimes, right, injuries. I was actually just on a call yesterday with a friend in Hawaii, and he was telling me, oh, I was out jogging and I sprained my ankle and now I'm using crutches. And right, it almost becomes a symbol of pride, right? Oh, I'm so tough. I was out trail running and I sprained my ankle and now I'm injured, right? And yet, this same individual, right, I can't even imagine him saying, oh, I woke up the other morning and I was feeling really unsettled and depressed, and it was hard for me to get out of bed. He doesn't talk about those things. He doesn't find pride in those things the same way he finds pride in an athletic injury. And yet, if we're going to change the way that men address their mental health, it's really important that we start to talk about it and that we talk about it the same way we talk about other things going on within our bodies. Um, we need to talk about mental health with our kids early on, as I said, and our colleagues so that it's normalized and so that others feel comfortable talking about it and asking for help. And we need to find supportive social groups of males who are safe and reliable. We need to be willing to ask for help, even though we may not want to. We need to practice asking for help. Now, why is that important? Well, nope, I'm going to go to the next slide and then I'll come back to that one. It's important that men find other men because the number one predictor of psychological resilience and mental health is a safe and reliable social support network. This is number one. Outside of exercise, outside of diet, outside of right medications, anything else, if you want to look at a person and say, is this person going to be mentally healthy? The number one factor is whether they have a social support network around them. And so it's important that as men that we find these social support networks, that we find male friends, that we find other groups of males where we can hang out and we can talk and we can share our experience. Because if you want to do anything to help somebody's mental health, it's really ensuring that they have that social support network, oftentimes outside of their home. So let me go here. So what can men do for their own mental health? Well, just a quick summary here. Number one, learn. It's important that men understand why. Men like to know why. So it's important that men take time to learn about the mind-body connection and how stress and emotions impact your body. How do emotions impact mental health? We need to stop unhealthy coping mechanisms that don't address the underlying issues. We need to stop things like substance abuse. We need to stop things, right, like aggression, right? Things that we do to cope that maybe don't actually address the underlying emotional trauma or the emotions that we're experiencing. Three, we need to exercise. Our bodies were intended to move, and emotions are very much rooted within our bodies. Your body gets unhappy when it doesn't move. In fact, many emotions are correlated with the stress response, and the stress response is the fight or flight response. And the fight or flight response, whether you're choosing to fight in a stressful experience or run, either way, you're supposed to be expending energy, and yet most of us just sit here and do nothing. And so oftentimes, one of the best ways to deal with difficult emotions is to move your body, to move your issues through your tissues. Exercise is probably second to social support. Moving that body is a great indicator and one of the best ways to support an individual's mental health. In fact, exercise has been shown to have the same efficacy as antidepressant medication when done regularly. So sleep, we need sleep. We all need sleep, not just men, everybody, 7 to 9 hours. This is when the brain recovers. This is when we process emotion. Talk, as I mentioned, we need to find someone to talk to. It could be a therapist, a friend. We need to talk about what's happening in our inner life and our outer life. And then finally, we need to be with people. We need to spend time with real people with whom you can be authentic, with whom you can talk about what's going on. We're herd animals just like any other mammal, and we need to feel safe and supported. So, with that said, as a society, we need to provide positive encouragement for males to own and address their mental health. Men shut down when they're challenged or ignored. So there needs to be a more socially proactive approach to getting men to think about their mental health. It needs to be something that is encouraged. It needs to be something that men feel safe doing. Employers, I think, really need to accept and encourage using sick leave to address mental health issues. A lot of times, right, we don't think that mental health issues would qualify for sick leave. And yet sometimes the best thing a person can do for their mental health is to take some time, right, to go see a therapist or to just deal with their own issues, right, before they come into the workplace. And allowing men to do that, right, gives them permission to say, oh, maybe I need to look for help. I mean, I have time to go look for that help. Maybe the most important thing that we need to do is, as a society, we need to discuss how other segments of society, whether that be women, the LGBTQIA population, or other social groups, how they can support men and be allies as men seek to redefine their place and their role within the 21st century. Um, it, Getting men to address their mental health can't be a blame-based adversarial relationship because, as I mentioned earlier, when men are challenged or blamed, they tend to shut down. It has to be based upon compassion, collaboration, and understanding. And so, for those of you out there who are listening to this, please think about ways that you can support the men in your life to talk about what's going on in their mental health and emotionally. Figure out ways that you can provide support. You know, I am a middle-aged white male. I recognize that a lot of the problems that we have today within our society around privilege and power and discrimination and right inequities and injustice is due to right my particular social demographic. And being able to accept that takes a toll on my mental health. It's hard for me to say, oh, these problems are because of people like me. That is hard, and yet I've been able to deal with that as I talk about it, right? With a supportive partner, with supportive family, with a therapist, right? And these are ally relationships. We talk about allies for the LGBTQIA population and the trans population. Men need allies as well. They need people who they feel safe talking about. And by doing that, we can help them redefine their relationship with themselves and with their mental health. So, with that said, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving me the chance to talk about this. I hope it was helpful, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Matt, I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation. It was amazing and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Tori.
Um, I want to say thank you for your vulnerability too. I know that probably is very difficult. Um,
It's getting easier.
I am very, very happy to hear that. So we did have some questions that came up in the chat during the presentation, but I want to give people a chance to also ask questions um, vocally or again right now. Um, we may have another. Oh, nope. Okay. Does anyone have a question, or should I ask, or should I vocalize what was said in the chat?
Tori, just go ahead and ask those questions first and then.
Perfect. I will do that. So, I don't know. Give me a second. I don't know who said this because I transferred it out, but how often are we seeing the men who believe these things in the mental health profession as clients?
I don't I don't know how often you're seeing them as clients. Because honestly, at this point, I would say that probably most men in the United States and specifically here in the West have grown up at least partially being socialized into this belief system. So really any male that you're seeing probably has exposure and has felt the impact of these belief systems, right, on themselves. Whether they fully absorbed it and behave that way or not, they're at least familiar with it and recognize it in their life. So I'm trying to understand what you mean by that in the mental health oh, and you mean as clients. Okay. Sorry, I'm like, I thought you were talking about being a therapist. I would say most folks who are therapists probably not. They probably hopefully dealt with their issues and are able to address it. But as clients, I would say probably most men, um, yeah, have been impacted at least somewhat by these beliefs. But the great thing is when they actually come in to seek help, they have reached a point where hopefully they're able to understand how damaging and difficult some of these societal beliefs are on them, and they're finally willing to talk about it. They're at a point where they're asking for help when they finally come in to see a mental health professional.
That was a really good answer to that. By the way, that was Jacelyn Becker. I did find who asked it, and she had another question, which I will ask now. Can men learn these things from healthy females if a healthy or an unhealthy male is no longer in the home?
That's actually a really good question. Um, and as I pointed out in yes, they can learn it through healthy females. And females can encourage men, right, to adopt more healthy attitudes. So we see men who grow up in homes where, let's say there's the only male. I'm thinking about my home. Let's take, so I have two daughters, and then my youngest son is the youngest. And he's been socialized in such a way that he gets along better with females. Most of his friends are females because that's what he grew up with. That's what he's comfortable with. So yes, families do impact socialization, and a healthy female can teach a male, but they're really, for most males, there's no replacement for um, that male to male connection. There's just something different about males talking one with another and seeing how other males behave and manage the challenges in their lives. That's a different thing. And as I mentioned, that's largely an observation and apprenticeship thing. It's just hanging out with them. It's not even explicit teaching, maybe. Um, But so yes, can they learn it through females? Yes. Is it a replacement for male friendship and male interaction? No. And honestly, if we go back to the slides, as I mentioned, a lot of these stereotypes get reinforced through single parent households where mothers, right, tell you're the man of the house. Oh, your dad's not here. You're the man of the house. You need to be tough. You need to be strong. You need to do this. And so we oftentimes see within single parent household that, even if they don't intend to, that some of these beliefs get replicated and passed down that way. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm rambling.
You have another question from Rachel Munson, who asked if it needs to be a father figure or any male interaction would work.
Uh, it, so it can be any male interaction. I mean, men, yeah, a mentorship sort of relationship, whether that's a father figure or some other mentor, tends to be really, really helpful. And we find that a lot of boys and younger men respond better to, right, having a relationship with somebody who is more of a father figure. As males get older, that becomes less important. So, right, when a male is early 20s, 30s, right, you're looking for more friendship and less of that father figure mentor. And yet, going back to the slide, and I could do a whole conversation on this, on the importance of apprenticeship for males. Um, it's really important for males to have role models that they look up to. Um, and so that, again, that father figure mentor type person can be really, really, really important. That's one of the reasons why, right, the Big Brothers program works really, really well, and other mentorship programs that have been set up for inner city youth and homeless youth and other things like that are so successful, is because it does work having that sort of mentor mentee father son type relationship. So I'm not probably not answering that well, but that's that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
I love it. I thought it was a great answer. Um, I'm going to give it a second for anybody else to ask a question or to put a question in the chat, and then we will probably transition into breakout rooms for our discussion. Alrighty, it seems as if we are good on questions for now. I want to say thank you again, Matt. Um, like I said, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very eye-opening, and I would love to be able to actually share this with some of the people that I care about a lot in my life. So I just want to very much express my gratitude on your willingness to present for us.
Thank you. You are welcome.
As for breakout rooms, we have a couple of discussion questions that we are going to talk about. So for hub members, in our first group, we have Heather Waters and Janelle, who will be talking about identity, vulnerability, and engagement. In our second group, we have Jeff and Leo. We're going to talk about mental health, stigma, and support. And then our last group, our third group, we're going to have Heather M and Stephanie talk about father inclusion and involvement. So if you guys would, you can just join your breakout rooms as the invite pops up. And Heather, I do see your question and we can discuss that after breakout.
We're still waiting for one group.
Oh, perfect. Was it our group?
No, mm-mm.
Oh,
It's
we have Heather.
Heather's group. And then you'll have time to go over some of the ideas discussed in breakout groups.
Perfect. Thank you for managing that, Janelle. So as everyone slowly makes their way back, I think they should be back by now. Perfect. I just wanted to give space to kind of go over what we talked about in breakout rooms. So for our hub members, if you have someone you'd like to nominate to kind of summarize the amazing things you talked about, that'd be great. Let's start with Heather W. and Janelle's group. Well, one of you guys want to talk about what you discussed?
So I will, Kurt, can I pick on you since you took notes to share back?
Yeah, you bet. I'd share. We
Thanks.
talked a fair amount about the first question about the how does vulnerability challenge traditional ideas, and I mean just see what Matt talked about a lot in the presentation about the importance of men being able to feel like they can talk and not being judged if they're saying things in a specific way, making sure that we leave conversations open if a man doesn't want to talk about it right at that moment, to have that conversation left open, and just to make sure we respond appropriately. And sarcasm or other things like that aren't always the best way to get that conversation to keep going. The second question about re-engaging, I think making sure, I think it was, I don't remember who it was in our group that said to make sure they make a point of being really grateful for fathers or father figures who are involved with their children's care, because a lot of times the dads are working and they'll take time off to come into the meeting or to the service, and making sure you're making a point that you're really grateful that they're there. So, I mean, guys need to have that kind of validation that their feelings are important, just like females do. And I think sometimes because of the stereotype of men just being, okay, I'm the man kind of thing, that a lot of times that validation may not be as obvious or as apparent to them. And it needs to be, so that they're willing to kind of share some feelings and emotions. Is that it, Heather?
That was a great summary. Thank you so much for doing that.
I was
Can
like,
I
it sounds
add
like you
some?
had a. Oh, sorry, go for it.
No, I was going to say, can I add something to that? Because I was in that group and I didn't get a chance to say this, but I do think a lot of times, and I know that my partner struggles with this, she feels like she has to be the sole, right, listening sounding board for me or whatever. There are things, even though I've been married for 30 years to the same partner, there are things that I'm not comfortable talking with her about. And it's important for men to have other men to talk to. And it's important for partners to recognize that there are things that men may not want to talk with them about. And, I just spent a week hunting with my brother. And the conversations we had were so rich and were so important because I felt comfortable opening up to him about things that, right, I may not even talk with my partner about. So going back to what Kurt said, pressuring men into saying, oh, you have to open up, you have to share your emotions, you have to do this, recognizing that there are certain things that may not be shared, and that's okay. But that's why it's important for men to find other male friends. So anyway, okay, I'll shut up. You've heard enough from me.
No, thank you for your input. I appreciate it. So for our second group with Jeff and Leo, would one of you guys share what you talked about?
I believe Leo's got us covered.
I'll share because I took notes. We talked mostly just kind of about the stigma and how we could support a lot of parents going through some mental health issues. I think something really interesting that I think Stacy brought up was that they do postpartum depression screenings that are offered to both parents. And then that just kind of brought in the idea that, yeah, it's the family is a unit and you should be supporting both parents, because Jeff mentioned that when there's two healthy parents, that there are obviously going to be better outcomes. And another thing to note is that mostly within the mental health field, I guess, it's still, I mean, a lot of moms or a lot of women are going in and actually seeking help for mental health issues or problems. And thus, that's why there's still probably a lot of work to be done with men and them getting a lot of treatment for mental health issues. But I think there are organizations that are on the right track. So that's good.
Yeah. I'll just add one quick thing. I think it goes along with what Kurt was saying. I think this was Alicia that brought this up. It's that validation piece, but just the strengths-based perspective when you are working with the males in the home, if they're present, to acknowledge what they're doing well, make that a point of what they're doing well. I think Matt could talk about this, but males receive a lot of criticism of what they get a lot of direct feedback on what they're not doing well. But being told from others that are outside of their partner what they might be doing well goes a long way. And so recognizing the strengths of, that they're balancing a lot, or they're doing this, or just Alicia had a really good example of just recognizing with a father how much he was doing to hold a lot of things together. And I think that probably goes a long way across the board.
You guys, it sounds like you guys also had an amazing discussion. So I was in the third breakout group and I did take notes, but I feel like you guys have heard a lot from me, so I want to invite either Stephanie or Heather, to comment on what we talked about.
Well, one thing that I was really excited about is that we have someone from another state with us, and she shared. Jay, do you want to say what she said in the chat? Because I can't remember, but they are starting some different things in her organizations that include fathers.
Yeah, she said that she's recruiting men to be certified family peer supporters in Ohio.
So I think that that's really neat that a man can go in and talk to a man. I know that I work for United Way, and we have a home visitation program that's under the Welcome Baby Home Visitation Program, and we use volunteers for non at-risk families. And we have several dads that and couples that go in, and it makes it a lot easier to be able to say we want to come in and visit with you, both you and mom, about your the birth of your child and some things that we can help your family with. So I think that that's really good. Some other things that were mentioned is Jade and Heather, not M, but the other Heather in our group. They work for McVie up in I think Davis County. I might be wrong about that, but one thing I really liked what Heather said was that she'll alter her schedule to go in and do a home visit on a Saturday if the dad was going to be there. And that is amazing that we are starting to think of those things. And then we had a comment about from Rachel that just said that when she's working with families, that she tries to include the dads if they're there and ask them about it. We had some really good comments, and I'm not remembering them all. Tori, you are going to have to help me out here because I didn't write anything down. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
I think you covered that really well. So thank you. I was like, I don't know if Heather you remember anything else that you wanted to add, but I was like, that hit everything that I was going to say. So I call
I
it
think
good.
the only thing I was going to add was, which just Matt jogged this for me, and when he added his comment, which is just that from the perspective of a parent, of a father, like, so my husband being a father, one of the things that he recently shared with me is that a lot of times, because we are a society that really focuses on involving the moms, and the moms get all the information and they go to all the visits and everything like that, my husband shared that a lot of times he feels like he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what his place is, and he doesn't know how to support or how to be involved. So not only, as JC said, like, making sure that we're giving that credit and that validation, and Matt said that as well, but also making sure that we're giving the father a role to play, and that we're making sure that we give them a place to be involved, because a lot of times they're maybe just at a loss, and not knowing what their role is, or how to be supportive, and so a lot of times that might be why they're taking a backseat.
Thank you, Heather. That was an amazing comment. Guys, this was a really, really interesting session to be a part of. I appreciate Matt's presentation, but I also appreciate you guys' comments and ideas. I think we all really enjoyed this discussion and this topic. So thank you guys for your participation. We have reached our time, so I want to remind everyone about our next session in November. It's going to be on the 19th, and it's about positive parenting. And I think Stephanie is going to be presenting for us. So I'm very excited about that. And I also just want to remind you guys that if you'd like participation credit for attending the session, to complete the survey that Janelle sent out. Thank you guys so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
And just email all your notes to the time to act at aggies.usu.edu.
Yes, thank you, Janelle. Have a good day, everybody.
Kurt, it's weird to see you with that background.
Yeah, it looks like his camera's from like the 90s.